Rogue Retrieval, Part 4. I still wasn't inside the building systems, but it was geared for internal wireless, which meant the darn thing was shielded from outside interference and scans and transmissions. Now, what legitimate mining concern would do that? It made me wonder just how good an idea it was going to be to return the kid to her mommy, if her mommy was part of a setup that locked its workers in tiny cubicles and probably didn't pay them. And also why Bluebirds was going for a mega hostile takeover when they'd have made ideal partners for these pricks. Maybe it was just because guys like these didn't play well with each other. I looked around, figured one of the closed doors on the left had to lead to quarters for the kitchen staff, and the other door was either one for the guards or an office. With not an opponent in sight, I took the risk and dove back into my head to check the schematics. It was no surprise when they didn't match. Maybe Bluebirds had a problem with their intel. That couldn't be good. It meant I really needed to get into the building systems before I took a trip through one of the side doors the guards had been blocking. I decided the kitchen staff would be behind the door closest to the kitchen, and that the guards had probably come through the open door to the room on the right, which left the second door in the left wall. He was hoping something went right. Right? It's always nice when a guess turns out to be correct, and when you don't need to blast the lock off an office door. Looked like the whole place ran on the same system, right up until I jacked into a port in the data bank and discovered it really didn't. Wow. Also, what in all the fornicating stars was this shit about? I wondered if I'd locked the office door, but it was too late. I was already dealing with some aggressive anti intrusion software. Fortunately, I had memories of another equally aggressive system to fall back on, so when the security construct tried tangling me in a sticky web like program designed to hold me in place, I countered it with an equally slimy protective coating and got right past. This was, after all, a snatch and grab mission, right? I mean, it had to be. Otherwise, I doubt I'd have been given 20 teleportation bracelets. Turns out, 20 wasn't going to be anywhere near enough, and I was sickened by the brief glimpses of what I'd found. Took me a minute to find the right folder for the schematics, and then it took me another minute to extract, unfold, and go over them. It was almost a minute too long, and the security construct had worked out where I was by the time I was done. And it's nice to see you too, I told it, when it materialized in the space beside me. By then, I'd worked out a faster way out of the system, so I renewed my coat of slime, activated an attack program that looked something like a flaming sword in my avatar's hand, and got right into it. Tight-assed cheapskates shouldn't be allowed to source defensive programs for illicit operations. Just saying. The first coils of a cliched immobilization program wound around me and slid off my digital armor. I retaliated with a counterstrike with the blade and watched with surprise as the security construct collapsed in a spectacular pile of ash. And then I left. It was a relief to be back in my own head and body. It was even more of a relief to know exactly what the inside of this building looked like. It was not so much of a relief to know exactly what to expect once I got through those doors. Tell Delight I need more teleportation bracelets and that she needs every trauma team on that cruiser on standby, I said, speaking out loud as I combed Mac and Tens. I was running for the rear door as I said it. Honestly, I should have remembered to lock the bastard on the way in, and I was 200 times the fool for forgetting. As it was, I was almost too slow. Almost. Getting there in time to stop it opening all the way and only having to shoot one of the returning guards. Granted, I had to shoot him twice, but I only had to shoot one before I could pull the door closed and lock it, so it wasn't going to unlock any time soon. Doing all that counted, right? Well, too bad. It counted for me. I eyed the door to the kitchen hand's quarters and decided it needed to stay locked as well. I love mini welders, especially the kind that take microseconds to do their job. For a moment, I thought about welding shut one of the doors leading into the rest of the building, and then I decided I didn't have the time. The building had protocols for my kind of intrusion. Is there any way Delight can port these kids out without the bracelets? I asked. It took me moments to realize that neither Mac nor Tens had replied, and I didn't have time to wait for them to come back online. Maybe the system had shielded the buildings from scans, even if comms could get through. Maybe that same shielding meant Delight couldn't port the kids out without bracelets, and that was something I could do something about. I just needed the right weapon to do it with. I wondered if Mac was close enough to share his rocket launcher, and whether or not he'd be that generous. Stand clear. His voice was quiet in my head, as though he had other things to worry about, but I got the impression he was hefting the launcher and swinging it in my direction. Stars help me, but I hoped the man had a clear line of fire, or even knew where to aim. If he hit anywhere but the kitchen, Delight wouldn't have to worry about putting anyone out. Ten's cutting in wasn't anywhere near comforting. All good, kid. He's using your system as a guesstimate. Stand as close to the rear wall as you can so we can minimize the damage to the internals. I did as he said, and he spoke again. Okay, I need you to find cover at least 30 feet away in 5, 4, 3. My brain froze, and then my legs were moving back through the kitchen and in through the open office door faster than they'd ever moved when I was in control. I still hadn't worked out how they could cut through the shielding for communications and not scans, but TENS had an answer for that. You carried us in, but Delight's port systems need something with broader coverage. My body found its way behind the server racks and then a heavy metal cabinet as far from the kitchen as it could get. It scrunched down, and I found enough control to tuck even tighter and wrap my arms over my head. The explosion was almost simultaneous, and heat and sound crashed over me as the back of the building shattered. I breathed a silent thanks to whoever had hacked my head enough to drive me. No problems, Cutter. Ha! I thought Tens had banned Rowan from interfering with the bodily control of others. Tens sounded tired as he explained. I was busy, and the boy knows how. The boy knows. Great. My body stood up without my permission, and I reached out and grabbed hold of one of the racks. You can let me go now, I said, briefly recalling the last and first time the boy had gotten into my head. That time had been at my request because I'd been drugged to the gills and needed to get out of a very bad situation. Back then, I'd passed out before the drugs had worn off. Now it was different, and I was asking him to give me back. He laughed, but my body became my own again. Honestly, having folk in my head was bad enough, but having someone take me over like a puppet, I was never going to be comfortable with that, no matter how much I needed it at the time. It took me a moment to gather my scattered thoughts, and I did it on the way out of what was left of the office. The room holding the kitchen hands was no longer locked, and I felt a twinge of pity for them, right up until I remembered what I'd seen in the files. Given they had to have known what was going on and hadn't lifted a finger to stop it, I only wish they'd taken longer to fry. The guards trying to break down the door were still there, but not a single one of them was going to be guarding anyone ever again. And that was even if all their pieces could be put back together. Looked like I hadn't needed to be limited to stun after all. Surveying the damage, I had to give Mac this. His aim was pretty damn precise, and I was really glad the rooms closest to the back wall had ended up being storage. After everything these kids had gone through, it would have been unfair if we'd lost any while trying to save them. I picked my way through the devastation of the kitchen and its rear wall and started checking for survivors. There was no one in the first room. That was easy enough to see, given it no longer had a door and most of its back wall was missing. The next half dozen rooms were empty too, but there were signs they'd been recently occupied, and I guessed Delight had the cruiser's port teams on standby. It made me wonder why she hadn't taken the time to pull me out too, and then I came across the stairwell that had been opened to the sky. This thing's got a basement, I said, and Max sounded out of breath when he replied. It's why you're still there. Get us into it. Okay then. At first, I couldn't see his point. I mean, the whole damn stairwell was open to the sky, so getting into the basement had to be the easy part, right? I bolted down the steps, thanking the stars that enclosed spaces weren't one of my fears. Airlocks aside, caves, stairwells, and cellars were all okay. I descended as fast as my feet could carry me, calming Mac as I went. What am I going to find? Busy. Nothing good. Busy, was he? Well, okay then. I guess I was on my own. And nothing good? I wished I'd seen a blaster I could have used in the blast zone, but not a single one of them had been intact, so I was stuck with the glazer. Place like this, though, chances were I'd find another set of guards before very long. Man, I hated it when I was right. And these guys had known I was coming, or that someone was coming. The first shot clipped the air near my shoulder, and I flattened myself back against the walls. Give it up! I shouted, trying to sound a lot bigger than I really was, and like there was more of me. Odyssey, right? I thought about that. Not really. I heard the cautious scrape of someone extricating themselves from a hiding place. When it spoke again, the voice was a lot nearer. Then who? Footsteps accompanied the question. They were probably meant to be too soft for me to hear, but whoever made them needed a lot more practice before that ever happened. I checked the charge on the glazer and decided dishonesty was the best policy. Bluebirds. The footsteps stopped and then started again. That's not what we heard. Judging from the nearness of the words, whoever was coming was about ready to strike. I ducked, and the hand that lashed around the corner missed its mark. I didn't. As I ducked, I'd taken a crouched step to the side, pivoting so I could come up under the grab. Two hard jabs to the gut doubled the guy over and sent him stumbling back. A knee to the face as I grabbed either side of his head and brought it down had him disoriented enough for me to push him back. The fast, hard kick to the knee took him to the floor as I looked for anyone else. Unfortunately, it also meant his body was no longer acting as a shield, and since he wasn't the only guard I had to contend with and the next one was still behind cover, I was in trouble. I caught sight of movement and snapped a shot in their direction as I stepped past the guard, making sure to keep out of grab range. He was down, but I doubted he was completely out, and bluebirds had a reputation. They sent you on your own. Apparently, I wasn't living up to it, so I lied again. They always send me on my own. Want to find out why? And I accompanied that with the most sinister grin I could manage. No. I threw myself sideways as several shots seared the space I'd been standing in. Too bad, I said, trying to think of what a hard-ass solo killer might do if they were in my shoes, and diving back across the floor for the first guard's dropped blaster. He was still moving, so I shot him in the head with the glazer as I went. His partner was unimpressed. You bitch! More shots split the space I'd been in. I realized that someone needed to spend more time on the range. Lucky me. The blaster was an easy grab, and I rolled past the first guy's inert form as I picked it up. Even luckier me. Luck had very little to do with my next two shots, however. I had spent a lot of time on the range, and then I'd spent a lot more time doing simulations of this very thing. I could shoot on the move, and usually hit what I aimed at. Usually. My first two shots splintered crates, but they did make my opponent keep their head down long enough for me to find my knees, pivot, and get my eyes on the barricade they were hiding behind. And by they, I meant he or she, since I was pretty sure there was only one of them left. For a long moment, nothing happened. Whoever was behind the crates didn't move a muscle, and neither did I, although I was going to have to move soon because this position was hard to hold. The guard saved me the trouble. I saw the top of her head as she bobbed up to see where I was, saw her face explode as my first two shots reached her, and watched the third bolt blow a hole in the door behind her. Her partner must have dialed up his settings on his way across the floor, because there was no way known the shots fired at me had had anywhere near this amount of power. When nothing else moved, and I heard no protest about her demise, I moved around the barrier. There'd only been two. That was both a relief and a worry. I slid past the mess I'd created and tried the door. When it swung open, I guess these guys had been relying on their position to keep what they were guarding secure. Amateurs. I wondered where the real protection lay. Most of it was upstairs. It was a relief to hear Mac's voice, but I wasn't going to take his word for it. I slid through the door like there was another ambush waiting on the other side, and I wasn't comforted to find there wasn't. The corridor was exactly like the ones upstairs, except the doors were spaced more widely apart. I didn't want to look to see what lay beyond the first one. I really didn't. But I hacked the coding and cracked it anyway. The kid was alone. He looked up when the door opened, saw me looking through it, and gave a moan of fear. I stepped back and away, pulling the door closed between us and locking it again. Mac, I managed, suppressing the urge to be sick. I need. Nausea roiled my stomach, and I stopped, swallowing convulsively against the urge to throw up. Fortunately, Mac got it. Delight's sending a team. Hack the feeds and make sure none of them are still being harmed. Beyond being locked in a room waiting for. I pushed the thought away. Once I'd made sure the kids were out of danger, I was going to go hunting. But first, I sat down with my back to the wall and went back into the system, finding the feeds for each room and the corridor leading to where I was. I probably should have found a secure room to do it from, or even remembered to lock the door behind me. Being brought back to reality by a size 13 combat boot in the ribs was not something I ever wished to repeat. I jolted back to reality, trying to push to my feet, only to have what I assumed was the same size 13 stomped hard in the center of my chest. The impact slammed me back down, and I remembered to shut my mouth, drop blaster and glazer both, and raise my hands. I sure as shit hope Delight had decided to come in person, because the muzzle and barrel I was staring at looked like they were ready to do business. I took a breath and saw them twitch, so I closed my eyes and spoke really, really fast, hoping I'd make it to the end of what I wanted to say before Mr. Size 13 pulled the trigger. I'm part of Mac's team. I need to get back in the system and make sure they didn't leave anyone behind to hurt the kids. I'm going to do that now, okay? I didn't bother waiting for an answer, and the pressure on my chest didn't ease, but no one said anything, and I sank back into the system, running through the scans to each room and doing my best to ensure nothing was happening anywhere that I needed to stop. In truth, all I wanted to do was run away screaming, to take a long hot shower and scrub myself over with something stronger than soap, to find and destroy every visitor who'd ever logged into this stars forsaken complex, to I found the girl Mac had promised to retrieve. She was in the last room I checked, and I came out of my head to find I wasn't looking down the business end of a blaster anymore. The corridor was full of movement around me, but I'd been left on the floor beside a familiar set of size 13s. I must have moved because the boots shifted and the soldier standing in them looked down.